Hello and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is The Advocate, and today I'm an advocate for A Storm of Swords, a rereader's review. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it took me a while, but I finally completed a read-through of A Storm of Swords. I have some thoughts, and I decided to put those thoughts into video form. So for those of you who have not watched my previous videos in the A Song of Ice and Fire reread review series, I'm approaching these reviews through a rereader's perspective. I've already read all the books in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, well, the 5 books that have been published anyway, so I am doing a second read-through to see if I have any additional thoughts or opinions that maybe I didn't have on a first read-through. Also similar to my previous reviews, I will be discussing some general thoughts about A Storm of Swords in the first half of this video. However, in the second half of this video, I will be discussing spoilers everything. Spoilers for A Storm of Swords, spoilers of all the previous books, and spoilers of the books to come. I provided timestamps below to kind of help you skip over some spoiler material if you don't want to be spoiled on on certain story elements. So just beware. So Storm of Swords is the third book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series. It is a sequel to A Clash of Kings, which is a sequel to A Game of Thrones. It was released on August 8 in the year 2000. Storm of Swords is the longest book in the series with a word count of 424,000 words. Wow, that is a big book. Now, on a first read-through, I would say that A Storm of Swords was my favorite of the 5 books. And on a second read-through, I would say that that opinion still holds. I think this book is fantastic. It is my favorite book in the series, and I love it. Many of the story elements that were built up during the first 2 books in the series get climactic resolution here in this third book in the series. Despite the fact that I already know what's going to happen, I still found myself very immersed. It always feels like there's something happening in each chapter in this book, which is a very good thing. In fact, sometimes it feels like there's so much happening all at once that I had to stop and kind of catch my breath and be like, all right, okay, whoa. You know, I'm getting punched in the face with storyline reveal after storyline reveal. Give me a minute here, Storm of Swords. Especially the last 500 pages of this book, which are just absolute pandemonium. It definitely feels like a climax to all the elements that have been built up over the previous books. Similar to the previous 2 books in the series, one of the big things that really stuck out to me on a second read-through of A Storm of Swords was just the amount of foreshadowing that is present in this book. A lot of little tidbits and nuggets that are just sprinkled throughout the narrative that are building up towards either huge resolutions later on in this very same book, or building up to story elements that will find some sort of resolution in the follow-up books. I didn't really catch a lot of these foreshadowing tidbits and nuggets on a first read-through, predominantly because I didn't know it was foreshadowing. Only on a second read-through am I aware that, oh, okay, specific character that is being name-dropped here is leading towards big event that is to come. So many allegories and metaphors are present throughout. It definitely feels like even on a second read-through, I wasn't able to catch it all, and I might even need a third read-through in order to be able to decipher more of what is being revealed through these tidbits of foreshadowing. I also had a greater appreciation for some of the big action set pieces that happen in this book because I am more aware of the foreshadowing that was present prior to those big events taking place and able to kind of see, okay, this is why this big event happened. It's because of these little things that happened prior that are building up towards this big set piece. Another thing I have a greater appreciation for is just how well developed these characters are. Yes, you know, I got the baseline personalities of these characters, but really I feel like it's on the second read through that I'm able to just kind of see how these characters act, who they are, and just able to, for lack of better words, wear their skin. So as far as spoiler-free thoughts go, I love this book. It was my favorite book on a first read-through. It looks like it'll be my favorite book on a second read-through. I haven't read A Feast for Crows or A Dance with Dragons on a second read-through quite yet, so we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But it was a great book. I loved it. So if you just want a baseline review of what it feels like to reread A Storm of Swords, it's great on a first read-through. It's fantastic on a second read-through. Go read it. But okay, there's a lot of things I'm dying to talk about right now, guys. So if you have not read A Storm of Swords or any of the follow-up books following A Storm of Swords, please click off this video because I'm about to spoil just massive events from this book and massive events that are to come. And even if you're like, well, I still want to kind of hear your spoiler. No. Click off right now, because trust me, you will hate me. Let's not dawdle any longer, ladies and gentlemen. You know what I'm about to talk about. Everybody knows what I'm about to talk about. The Red Wedding. It is one of the most controversial events in modern-day fantasy literature. It is also one of the most infamous. Why did George do it? George R.R. Martin has received a lot of flack, both in the year 2000 when this book was released, and also in the year 2013 when the Red Wedding episode aired on HBO TV, with regards to his inclusion of such a pessimistic and tragic event in the story. Both readers and critics alike have criticized George R.R. Martin for essentially writing something that feels almost spiteful of traditional fantasy storytelling tropes. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to break tradition and wanting to bring something new to the table when it comes to writing fantasy. However, some people have argued that George exclusively only did this just because he wanted to abide by his anti-traditionalist storytelling. In fact, George was approached and asked why he decided to kill so many pivotal characters to the story. In a 2013 interview with Entertainment Weekly magazine, George R.R. Martin had this to say: "I like my fiction to be unpredictable. I like there to be considerable suspense. I killed Ned because everybody thinks he's the hero, and that, sure, he's going to get into trouble, but then he'll somehow get out of it. The next predictable thing is to think his eldest son is going to rise up and avenge his father, and everybody's going to expect that. So immediately, killing Rob became the next thing I had to do." Further on in this interview, George clarifies on the realism of his fictional world by saying, "You read that certain kind of fiction where the guy will always get the girl, and the good guys win, and it reaffirms to you that life is fair. We all want that at times, but that's not the kind of fiction I write in most cases. It's certainly not what Ice and Fire is. It tries to be more realistic about what life is. It has joy, but it also had pain and fear. I think the best fiction captures life in all its light and darkness." Fantasy author Brandon Sanderson was also approached about what he thought about the Red Wedding and, by extension, George R.R. Martin's anti-traditionalist fantasy storytelling. In a 2016 AMA on Reddit, Brandon Sanderson stated, "I'll admit I haven't read the entire A Song of Ice and Fire. I read the first book, and while I thought the writing was excellent, I found the experience too much for me. It didn't feel realistic so much as, look how much I can build someone up before I destroy them, which is an absolute art. It's using emotion in a very powerful and clever way. But I feel that he's often doing things to shock and surprise, precisely because they'd be too pessimistic for an ordinary fantasy series. Indeed, his series feels like a distinct reaction and contrast to the cozy fantasy stories of the 80s. Now, this isn't to say that George R.R. Martin's sort of breaking of tropes is indicative of any bad writing on his behalf. No, I think it's great and amazing that he's choosing to write a story that is clearly different from his contemporaries before him. However, there are questions to be raised about whether or not he is doing this exclusively because it makes sense within the context of the story that a red wedding were to occur, or he just decided to do it because, hey, I want to break people's hearts and go against the hero's journey story trope. George's work seems fundamentally pessimistic, which I don't say as a slam. Saying George's work is pessimistic doesn't mean that he is pessimistic, only that he creates a work of art that evokes emotion and discussion through pessimistic themes. Now, although the Red Wedding is this horribly tragic event, and it definitely ripped my heart out the first and even the second time that I read this book, I firmly applaud George's decision to take this narrative route. Not only do I find it interesting, but I also applaud just the amount of balls that George has to essentially kill off his Luke Skywalker. As George stated in his Entertainment Weekly interview, it provides pretty much an element of unpredictability. Now, the reader is left thinking, holy snap, what's going to happen now? Is Jaime Lannister going to do something? Or is Tyrion Lannister now the main character? What the heck is this? I enjoy not being able to predict what happens next. Well, within reason, as long as it makes sense within the logic of the story. And after I cried my tears and I slept overnight, I was fully looking forward to seeing what happened next. The Red Wedding is also not something that happens just spontaneously out of the blue. It's something that has been built up over time. Key decisions made by Robb Stark in the previous book have led to this point. That and the wedding itself has been foreshadowed ever since the Clash of Kings. As far as the Storm of Swords go, various references to the importance of hospitality and guest right are provided in the previous chapters.
Your father would have had my head off, the king gave a shrug. Though once I had eaten at his board, I was protected by guest right. The laws of hospitality are as old as the first men, and sacred as a heart tree.
The gods will curse us, he cried. There is no crime so foul as for a guest to bring murder into a man's hall.
'Tis scarcely chivalrous to threaten your host over his own cheese and olives, the Lord of the Dreadfort scolded. In the north, we hold the laws of hospitality sacred still.
Rob, listen to me. Once you have eaten of his bread and salt, you have the guest right, and the laws of hospitality protect you beneath his roof.
Rob looked more amused than afraid. I have an army to protect me, mother. I don't need to trust in bread and salt.
Not to mention key pieces of dialogue from the Lannisters themselves.
Granted enough time, a better option may well present itself. One that does not require the king to give up half his kingdom. This Westerling betrayal did not seem to have enraged his father as much as Tyrion would have expected. The crag is not so far from Tarback Hill and Castamere, Tyrion pointed out. You'd think the Westerlings might have ridden past and seen the lesson there. Mayhaps they have, Lord Tywin said. They are well aware of Castamere, I promise you. Every once in a very long while, Lord Tywin Lannister would actually threaten to smile. He never did, but the threat alone was terrible to behold.
Plus foreshadowing about Grey Wind, Robb Stark's direwolf.
I am not a wolf, no matter what they call me. Robb sounded cross. I am not going to banish him just because my wolf doesn't seem to like the way he smells. Should I have Grey Wind sniff all my nights? There might be others whose smell he mislikes. I dreamt a wolf howling in the rain, but no one heard his grief, the dwarf woman was saying. I dreamt such a clangor, I thought my head might burst. Drums and horns and pipes and screams, but the saddest sound was the little bells.
And even build-up and foreshadowing from Catelyn and Robb themselves as well.
Nothing will happen to you. Nothing. I could not stand it. If anything befell you, I would go mad, Robb. You are all I have left. You are all the North has left. I am not dead yet, Mother.
With so much build-up and foreshadowing present in this book, and even some in the previous book, A Clash of Kings, it was inevitable that Robb Stark and Catelyn Stark would both meet their demise at such an event.
That was very good, Your Grace. No words can set it right. Heh. Well said, well said. We'll have music, such sweet music. And wine, heh, the red will run, and we'll put some wrongs aright. Bread and salt, heh, of course, of course. My guests, he said, my honored guests, be welcome beneath my roof and at my table.
Now, a couple months ago, a friend and I recently got into a discussion with regards to the logic that is involved in planning and executing something as grandiose as the Red Wedding. My friend, who's more of a critic about the inclusion of the Red Wedding, stated that it made absolutely no sense for House Frey to decide to essentially tarnish their own reputation. Walder Frey did not think it through, according to my friend, because now they are essentially public enemy number one in the North. They are surrounded by all these northern households. The North hates them, and they've also tarnished their reputation with other houses that aren't in the North, because now no one would want to go to a wedding or a dinner event planned by House Frey. Now, although I do agree with my friend that yes, Walder Frey and essentially House Frey are complete idiots for making enemies with the entire north of the continent, it made sense within the context of the Walder Frey character. He is a persnickety old man who is very prideful and takes slights against him very seriously. It made sense for someone like him to do something as idiotic as kill the king. On top of that, it made sense that although he is an idiot, he is not as giant of an idiot to not have the assurance of Tywin Lannister that they would be protected by King Joffrey at the time, who had yet to die, that they would be okay. They would be protected under King Joffrey's decree. The only thing I kind of have a little bit of a problem with is just kind of the foolishness on behalf of Robb Stark He has multiple opportunities to back out of what he believes is going to be a new alliance between himself and the Freys, and he doesn't listen to Greywind, his direwolf, that, hey, the Freys are not people to be trusted. And he doesn't listen to Catelyn, who's like, hey, Walder Frey is not a man to be slighted. You've slighted him once. He's probably up to no good. He chooses not to read the clues, and he waltzes into pretty much his own demise. And it's, that's the one thing where I'm kind of like, I don't know if this made total sense for the Robb Stark character, but I'm willing to suspend disbelief a little bit, just since he's 16, and it's like, okay, well, maybe he doesn't believe that the Freys are capable of such evil. But enough about the Red Wedding. There's more things to like and digest about A Storm of Swords. One of the key things being the redemption of Jaime Lannister. It's so crazy to me that this slimy man who sleeps with a sister and pushes little boys out windows and kills Ned Stark's men is capable of being redeemed, but lo and behold, The Storm of Swords does a very good job of doing that. His point of view, Jaime Lannister's point of view, is the first point of view chapter in this book, not including the prologue, of course. And you see it all. You see the beginnings of, hey, this man only cares about himself and nobody else, and he just wants to get back to King's Landing and sleep with his sister, because that's all he knows. Fighting and sleeping with his sister, and, occasionally saving the innocents from King Aerys's wildfire. But then by the end of the story, he genuinely cares about the well-being of Brienne of Tarth, and cares for the well-being of the Kingsguard and for other people.
Sir Jaime! Even in soiled pink satin and torn lace, Brienne looked more like a man in gown than a proper woman. I am grateful, but you were well away. Why come back? A dozen quips came to mind, each crueler than the one before. But Jaime only shrugged. I dreamed of you, he said.
Jaime's redemption is very well paced. It doesn't happen all at once. Little by little throughout his point of view chapters, you're given an insight into the things that he went through when he was part of the Kingsguard for King Aerys. Getting little nuggets of information about, oh man, Jaime really has seen some nonsense back in his day. He was bearing it deep down inside of him, and he tried to put on this facade that he didn't care, leading up to the very end where he finally faces up to it, and he cares. It's a good story, and out of all the POV chapters that I read in this book, I would say that Jaime Lannister's is my favorite. However, typical in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, for every yin there has to be a balance of yang. Jaime is on the up and up, which means someone's got to come down, and unfortunately that's Tyrion. Now, Tyrion Lannister is one of my favorite characters. I always enjoyed his witty dialogue, his japes, as you say. He's just a very fun character to read. So I think I was kind of, when I first read this book, I was kind of blinded by my love for the character, that I overlooked that, hey, his final POV, he's giving into this almost this sense of villainy, almost this vile nihilism where he just has a hatred for all of those around him for getting him into the situation that he is in. Jaime Lannister frees Tyrion from his cell, and they have a wonderful reunion, and it's great, and we're happy, and then Jaime reveals that Tyrion's first wife, Tysha, wasn't actually a whore, but was someone that legitimately loved Tyrion, and Jaime was just asked to lie to Tyrion and tell him that, hey, you're married to a whore, and Tyrion responds by just finally giving in to his anger that has been building up throughout the whole book, essentially lying to Jaime that I killed Joffrey just to make himself be the villain in everyone else's eyes because he feels like a villain. And then he gives into those tendencies by strangling Shay, which felt unnecessary. And I didn't really, when I first read the book, I was like, oh, he's standing up to Shay. She betrayed him. Yeah, Tyrion's winning. But, that's on the second read through, I was like, wow, that was not necessary. Shay was manipulated by Cersei into standing trial against Tyrion. She wasn't at fault, yet he killed her just out of some sense of angry, injustice, which he was handed injustice, but Shay didn't really have anything to do with it, so he took it out on her and killed her. And yes, I'm aware that Tyrion was also angry at the realization that Shay was sleeping with Tywin, but that still does not change the fact that Shay's death was the product of vengeful murder, thus marking a downward turning point for Tyrion's character. And then he killed his father, which, when I first read through, I was like, yes, he's finally standing up to his father, he's getting revenge, but it doesn't really solve anything aside just giving Tyrion that short momentary burst of pleasure. And I didn't really catch his dip into villainy until this read through, where I'm able to just kind of pick up on, hey, wait a minute, Tyrion's not a nice character, why did he do that? That was pretty gross. George R.R. Martin has never shied away from showing the ugliness of revenge, and I think there's not a more just kind of poetic incarnation of that ugliness than in the resurrection of Catelyn Stark. This once loving mother who has now been revived into this vengeful spirit who wants to kill all the people that were responsible for her death and the death of her son Robb Stark. Not to mention that this new vengeful Catelyn is also apathetic towards any innocent lives who may be affected by her murderous revenge spree, thus keeping in line with this series' philosophy on the ugly price of revenge. On top of the Ghost of Highheart's prophecy regarding the resurrection of Catelyn Stark, the Ghost of Highheart also provides tidbits and nuggets about our long-talked-about supervillain that is to come, Euron Crow's-Eye Greyjoy.
I dreamt of a man without a face, waiting on a bridge that swayed and swung. On his shoulders perched a drowned crow, with the seaweed hanging from his wings.
This villain, who similar to the Red Wedding, is receiving a lot of foreshadowing and build-up throughout the first couple of books.
The brother's back. Crow's Eye, they call him. As black a pirate as ever raised a sail. He's been gone for years. But Lord Balan was no sooner cold than there he was, sailing into Lordsport in his silence. Black sails in a red hull, and crewed by mutes. He's been to Asai and back, I heard. Wherever he was, though, he's home now. And he marched right into Pike and set his arse in the Seastone chair.
Based on the increasing amount of references to the Crow's Eye character with each passing book, it's very clear that Euron will play a pivotal role not only in the follow-up books in this series, but also in the books that have yet to be published. With the amount of discussion that I've contributed to talking about all the foreshadowing that is present in this book, you would think that I love every single little thing about A Storm of Swords. And although that is true for 95% of it, there is one thing that I do have a problem with, and that's with regards to some of the retcons that are present. Now, I think retcons, if used correctly, can do a really amazing job in expanding the world and building character. However, when it's clear that a retcon wasn't planned out from the very beginning and it was only just kind of dropped in recently, then that's when I have a problem. And that retcon is the Catspaw dagger storyline that was presented in the first book, A Game of Thrones. In the first book, a Catspaw has a dragonglass dagger and attempts to assassinate both Bran Stark and Catelyn Stark. However, we are led to believe that Cersei Lannister was the person responsible for sending that Catspaw, and then rather flimsily, Tyrion just kind of spells it out for everybody. In the POV chapter prior to the Purple Wedding, which is where Joffrey dies, Tyrion just kind of haphazardly spills this exposition about like, oh my gosh, Joffrey sent that Catspaw in order to kill Bran Stark because of, just some lame reason about like, oh, he just wanted his father's approval. Okay, I'm going to kill Bran. It felt so out of the blue. I feel like there's multiple other routes they could have taken it. Maybe you could have had Littlefinger be the one who attempted to murder Bran Stark, and it would have made more sense to the story given what we know about how mischievous Littlefinger is. There's multiple other suspects that George R.R. Martin could have written as the Catspaw dagger culprit, but I felt like George didn't really know how to properly resolve that plot line, so he just kind of said, yeah, it was Joffrey. Yeah, Joffrey. All right, moving on now. I didn't like it. However, besides the plentiful amount of foreshadowing that is present within this book, I think the number one thing that just really stood out to me was this quote by Daenerys Targaryen in the very last Daenerys POV chapter in this book.
The gods do nothing without a purpose, they say. You did not die in battle, so it must be they still have some use for you.
The context for this quote is a conversation that Daenerys Targaryen is having with Ser Jorah Mormont before she kicks him out of her council and banishes him from Meereen. I just thought this quote is just completely appropriate, not just for A Storm of Swords, but for the entire Song of Ice and Fire series. The gods, who kind of in this almost fourth wall breaking meta sense, George R.R. Martin, he writes these characters with a purpose, and once those characters outlive their purpose, then it's exit stage left. You've outlived your usefulness. You get killed off. And I think it's just such a very poetic quote.
And will likely continue to be poetic for the remainder of the series, as the gods, who act as an extension of George R.R. Martin, will continue to kill off characters once they no longer have use to the plot.
So all in all, in case you couldn't tell, I really love A Storm of Swords. It was my favorite book on a first read-through, and as of reading the first 3 books a second time, it still remains my favorite book. Many plot lines from the first 2 books are resolved in this book. It's an action-packed story. It always feels like there's a set piece in every single chapter. It's just a wonderfully written book, and in my opinion, it is George R.R. Martin's magnum opus. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed my review of A Storm of Swords through a rereader's perspective. If you've read this book before, or maybe you haven't, please let me know what you thought of this video, or just let me know what you think in general. Do you agree with my assessment that this is the best book in the series? Do you disagree? Leave a comment below and let me know. My next video, predictably enough, will be a review of A Feast for Crows through a rereader's perspective. I'm probably going to take a little bit of a break before I read that one. If you're reading these books for the first time, I fully recommend taking a break after reading A Storm of Swords. A Feast for Crows is a whole different vibe, and I don't feel a reader would properly enjoy a lot of the world-building elements of that book if they're anticipating something as fast-paced and dramatic as A Storm of Swords. So thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen, for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. The Advocate, out.